Imagine yourself moving to a new town. You've never been there before and are concerned about meeting new people and forming new relationships. You're uncomfortable in your new environment, perhaps even feeling lonely and vulnerable. Eventually, you meet a new group of friends, maybe at school or at the grocery store. They invite you to hang out with them often. They are warm and inviting and give you a sense of community and friendship you've been longing for. Your newfound friends offer you a warm meal and a shoulder to lean on when you're struggling. Maybe the new city makes you uncomfortable, or you're having a hard time in a new school. Everything is going great, and you're happy to feel like you finally belong somewhere.
However, things start to feel strange. You made more new friends by joining the soccer team, but your group is unhappy about this. They tell you that if you want to continue to hang out with them, you can't be on the soccer team anymore. They tell you the soccer team is a bad influence. They're too aggressive and they don't care about their grades as much as you do. This makes you upset, but you remember how much they supported you when you first arrived. So eventually you decide to quit the soccer team.
Then you get into a fight with your parents. You confess what happened to your group and they reassure you that you aren't in the wrong, that your parents' rules and expectations are harmful, and that you deserve better. This makes you upset too, as deep down you understand that your parents only want what's best for you and they're trying their best. But you're reminded once again of the support you received from this group during the beginning of your time in this town. So you begin to distance yourself, doing homework after school and eating dinner with your friends instead of in the living room with your family.
To an outsider, these are all major red flags. An individual is distancing themselves from the things and people they used to enjoy and care about, no longer participating in their favorite extracurricular activities or sharing details of their day with their family. However, to the individual, they are feeling all around love and support. They are being lured into a toxic environment by open arms and love bombing. And the worst part is, the distance that is being created between the individual and the outside world is only the beginning. This is Mae, Jessica, Danielle, and Savannah, and you're listening to Cults and Communes, the dark side of communalism.
Hello, listeners. My name is Danielle, and I will be starting off the episode by talking about one of the most infamous cults, in my opinion, the Manson family. Their leader, Charles Manson, is known to be one of the most notorious serial killers and cult leaders in history. Manson, who is actually from Cincinnati, Ohio, endured a rough childhood. His mother was a sex worker struggling with substance abuse issues and ended up placing him in an all-boys school at the age of 12. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was 16 years old when she gave birth to Charles, and because she worked as a sex worker, she didn't exactly know which man was his father. It has also been said that she ended up in prison, just like Charles, for armed robbery and never saw him again after being incarcerated. He attempted to go back to her multiple times, but she rejected him every single time. From then on, he was in and out of prison for crimes ranging from petty larceny to armed robbery. When he wasn't in prison, he was in reform schools, foster care, and group homes. Manson spent the first half of his 32 years of life incarcerated. He also learned the benefits of being a model prisoner early on. Probation reports describe him as suffering from a marked degree of rejection, instability, and psychotic trauma, and constantly striving for status and securing some kind of love. These qualities outline the blueprint to make him the most notorious cult leader that he is known to be today. It wasn't until 1967, when he was released from prison, that he moved to San Francisco and established himself as a hippie cult leader, calling his followers the Manson family. Manson took advantage of the growing hippie movement in the 1960s to help grow his cult following. He used the movement's ideals of free love and spiritual exploration to manipulate vulnerable people to become one of his followers. The hippie movement attracted many young people, especially those who were looking to get out of mainstream society. Many of these young people were also runaways, dropouts, and lonely people, so they were vulnerable to the Manson family's false sense of belonging. His first couple of followers were Mary Brunner, a library assistant, and Lynette Fromm, a teenage runaway. It is stated by sources that his cult grew up to at least 35 followers, most of whom were vulnerable young women. All of his followers embraced Manson's values of peace and communal living, so much so that they followed him as he relocated to the cult to Spahn Ranch in San Fernando Valley. The Manson family and the hippie movement were also notorious for their drug uses, such as LSD and other psychedelic drugs. These types of drugs made it easier to control the followers as they made them more suggestible to the Manson family ideals. The Manson family was dedicated to teaching their followers about his eccentric and unusual religious teachings that involved science fiction and occult psychology. Manson preached about an apocalyptic war motivated by racial tensions between black and white people. This war would destroy the rest of the U.S. and leave the Manson family in power. This is known as Helter Skelter and even involved references to the Beatles' White Album. The Manson family believed that he was their god and supported his Helter Skelter prophecies. Manson's influence was so strong on his followers that he got them to commit several murders. The most notable was the murder of Sharon Tate and her 3 house guests. Manson had gotten 3 of his young female followers to break into their homes and commit these murders in the summer of 1969. On August 8, 1969, he instructed Charles Watson, also known as Tex, along with Susan Atkins, Patricia Kerwinkle, and Linda Kasamian to go to the home of Sharon Tate and brutally kill everyone there, which is exactly what they did. On the night, the 4 of them, along with Leslie Van Houten and Stephen Gogan, also known as Clem, broke into the house of Leno and Rosemary LeBlanca and murdered them. These 6 followers specifically demonstrated one of the darkest sides of falling prey to a cult. They were so under Manson's control that he got them to commit these murders, making them believe they followed his teachings. This is one of the main instances of Manson's brainwashing. Even after the murderous followers were arrested, the female followers were seen smiling and singing to each other, almost as if they were unaware of what they had done because they were so brainwashed by Manson. Here's an audio clip of the girls singing now. Although he was never physically involved in the Manson family murders, Manson was found guilty of all the murders as well as his murderous followers in January 1971, and he ended up dying in prison. Manson's influence on his followers was so profound and long-lasting that in 1975, several years after his arrest and the end of the Manson family, one of his original followers, Lynette Frum, attempted to assassinate the president at the time, Gerald Ford. She has been on parole since, and a couple of Manson's murderous followers have also been released from prison, such as Leslie Van Houten, who was paroled in 2023. Now we will hear from Maeve, who will be talking about communalism and how it is connected to the Manson family.
Hi everyone, this is Mae speaking. I can only imagine you're all taking a second to process that story just like I am. Although heartbreaking and terrifying, cults like the Manson family have risen and fallen all throughout history. Thank you, Danielle, for that chilling retelling of the Manson family cult story. For the next segment of this episode, we will be breaking down the inner workings of this cult in relation to our concept of focus, communalism. Let's start with the facts. The term communalism is used to describe the relationships and inner workings of a community. More specifically, the University of Illinois states, communalism implies an awareness of the fundamental interdependence of others with a premium being placed on social bonds and group obligations. They continue by saying that this specific cultural orientation places the needs of a group before those of the individual. To break down that definition into terms that are easier to digest, the idea of communalism focuses on the community as a whole. Regardless of the negative impacts it may have on the individual or the personal losses they may experience, Communalism subscribers place emphasis on the benefits that their words and actions can have on their community collectively. Based on this explanation, it is easy to understand the positive impacts that communalism can have on a society. We see this principle emphasized and practiced all throughout history and still very prominent in modern collectivist cultures. Communalism happens on many different levels of society, whether that is within a neighborhood, in a town, or spread across a religious community. In a neighborhood, you may take your neighbor's trash can back to their house or get their mail for them while they're out of town. While this takes more time for you to do, and there is no individual gain, your focus is on keeping potential hazards out of the street and ensuring your neighbor's property is not harmed or stolen. On a town or city level, communalism may look like groups of individuals coming together to raise money for community programs or clean up community spaces. These acts of service for their town take time out of their day, and energy is used to support other people and places. However, under the principles of communalism, the individual is not concerned with their own gain, but rather more focused on supporting their community and doing what they can to help. Within a religious community, communalism can appear in many different ways. The most prominent example is typically praying. In most religious communities, members reach out to others and ask for support and prayer through the trials and tribulations that they or people close to them may be experiencing. This is an extremely common practice of communalism that happens every single day. Religious individuals pray for their community members, not for their own benefit, but for the well-being of people around them. Now that we've discussed the positive impacts of communalism, we can better understand and explore the other side. While having a communal mindset can be very beneficial, it can also be very detrimental and result in a lack of focus on oneself that may cause more general harm than good or be difficult to recover from. A well-known example of harmful forms of communalism are cults. Unfortunately, in some cases, like the ones we will discuss today, the lack of focus on the individual led to the inability to emphasize other communities surrounding these people and, tragically, the loss of their lives. While I'm sure everyone is familiar with the concept of cults because of their infamous representation in pop culture and media, we're going to do a quick refresher. A cult is defined by Britannica.com as a usually small group devoted to a person, idea, or philosophy. As we heard, the Manson family cult is a prime example of negative communalism. Charles Manson convinced his followers to idolize him and the desires he held for their supposed collective future. He preached falsehoods and used their commitment to his cult to influence them to turn on other groups in society. Additionally, he convinced members to do his dirty work, like committing murders, all while insisting that these irreversible actions would be beneficial for their collective and even the world. Manson preyed on individuals who he knew already held the ideals he was preaching to join him, more specifically creating a sense of belonging for individuals who were formerly lacking in this area of support just like he was. Recruiting young people who were either rejected by society in the same way he was, or so-called hippies who desired love and community helped him connect with people and form his cult. By providing resources and affection, he was able to gain the trust of these individuals and create a quote-unquote safe space for them, or so it seemed initially. With these young people, he always preyed on their desire to rebel from the constructs of modern society and their malleable psychology by using drugs to further grab a hold of their influence and encourage them to idolize him. These techniques were often very effective and gained him a plethora of followers until the demise of their cult leader or his imprisonment. It can be assumed that Manson used these techniques and knew they would work because he connected with these individuals and understood, to a certain extent, what they were going through. He was able to create a violently strong sense of communalism for these young people because of the support he lacked when he was younger. As we heard, Manson had a difficult life and childhood prior to becoming a cult leader. He was disregarded by many people who were supposed to care for him and treated him more as a dreadful obligation than a child for someone to love and protect. The consistent rejection he felt and experienced at the hands of his mother severely altered his perception of what love and acceptance meant and felt like. Because of these twisted ideologies, he chose to resort to an obsessive form of communalism. He created a community that had many of the positive aspects of communalism, such as relying on each other, supporting each other, and carrying out life together. However, his damaged psyche led him and his followers to their ultimate doom. He brainwashed them with his false ideology about the world and his existence, and even convinced them to commit murders for him, as they believed it was the best way to support someone they were manipulated into viewing so highly. We experience the positive impacts of communalism every single day, by visiting community centers, bringing food and gifts to new neighbors, or simply following traffic laws. It is clear that the general principle of communalism is beneficial for a society and its members, as people desire support and connection naturally. However, with a man like Charles Manson and a group like the Manson family cult, we can also see how harmful communalism has the potential to be when placed in the wrong hands or working towards poor ideologies. While understanding how cults like the Manson family work may be intimidating or scary, it allows us to understand how harmful they truly are and avoid mistakes made by others throughout history by learning through their tragic consequences. After all that, I'll leave you with these questions. Do you think Manson's extreme dire form of communalism was rooted in an extreme lack of communalism he felt during his childhood? Do you think love and care from his mother or a parental figure would have changed the trajectory of his life? And finally, what do you think you would do if Manson approached you and asked you to follow him? Stay tuned for the next segment of this episode where we will learn together about another detrimental example of communalism, the People's Temple.
Hey everyone, I'm Savannah, and while you think about Mae's questions, I'm going to begin to share the story of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, which is yet another aspect of the dark side of communalism. Jim Jones was born on May 13, 1931, in the rural community of Crete, Indiana. Growing up, he had always been a very active churchgoer, often attending church multiple times a week and having been baptized several times. With this, Jones developed a deep desire to become a preacher. This is a very important beginning in the development of the People's Temple and its end result. Growing up was not easy for Jones. His mother was reported to have been neglectful, exhibiting no genuine maternal instincts. His father was a disabled World War I veteran who experienced extreme illness due to injuries he sustained from a chemical weapons attack. This illness led to financial difficulty, resulting in them being evicted from their home. Relatives of the Jones family purchased them a shack in a nearby town called Lynn. The shack had no plumbing or electricity, and they often lacked adequate food. The people of Lynn had a good amount of sympathy for Jones because of his living situation, so they often gave him food, clothing, and small gifts. Despite the sympathy others felt for him, they described Jim as an unusual child who was overly obsessed with religion and death. After completing high school, Jones enrolled at Indiana University Bloomington with the intention of studying to pursue a career as a doctor, which he quickly changed his mind on. 2 years later, in 1951, Jones moved with his then-wife, Marceline Baldwin, to Indianapolis. He began taking night classes at Butler University and eventually earned a degree in secondary education. At this time, he was also serving as a student pastor in the Methodist Church, and after around 3 years of this, he chose to open his own church. His church originally went by the name Community Unity Church in 1954. The following year, the name changed to Wings of Deliverance, and then in 1956, it became the People's Temple. The People's Temple affiliated to the Christian Church in 1960, and in 1964, Jones was officially ordained a minister. Jones had a commitment to multiracial equality, so within his congregations, there was a great deal of racial diversity, which is something that was not often seen at this point in time. In 1965, Jones made a move to California. Here, he was able to appeal to young, college-educated people who were involved in the progressive political scene, as well as lower-income and working-class families. The People's Temple grew to offer a variety of free community services, such as childcare, wellness checks, and assistance for the elderly and those struggling with mental health disorders. In 1974, the People's Temple Agricultural Project began. This was a negotiation with the government of Guyana, which would develop a 4,000-acre site near the border of Venezuela. The lease for this land was signed in 1976, and the community of Jonestown was created. Guyana was chosen to house the community of Jonestown because of an English-speaking yet multicultural country. Another reason, and the main reason for this move to Guyana, was the unflattering media depictions and ongoing investigations into Jones's congregations in California. There was talk of Jones staging fake cancer healings, subjecting his followers to beatings, and demanding members turn over their belongings, homes, and even custody of their children to Jones, who by now was often referred to as Father or the Prophet. With Jones' move to Guyana, over 1,000 temple members made the journey with him. Here's a clip from a temple member interview to put into perspective their thought processes versus the reality that I will share with you shortly.
About your background and how you ended up here?
Sure. I guess actually started when I was in Vietnam. I started with drugs while I was over there. Became very alienated, very bitter, very hostile, very angry, and didn't know what to do with myself or my life until I heard about Jim Jones and People's Temple. And when I came to the temple, I stopped doing drugs and gave up cigarettes, alcohol, not because anybody told me to, just because I wanted to. I finally had found something that was real. That's the only way I can describe it. Worth living.
How do you like it here?
It's beautiful. I've never been so totally happy or fulfilled in my life. I can't begin to describe it. You could sit here and talk all day long and no words could describe the peace, the beauty, the sense of accomplishment and responsibility and camaraderie that's here. It's overwhelming. It really is. You can't describe it.
To follow that, it's safe to say that either their visions of Jonestown ended up being vastly different and or there was some extent of coercion behind the camera during these interviews. Their hopes of a utopia were quickly shattered. Temple members worked long days in the fields, and they were subject to harsh punishments if they questioned Jones' authority. Passports, money, and medications were confiscated. Members were threatened with blackmail, beatings, and even death if they did not comply with the rules set out by Jones. Armed guards patrolled the entire compound. Members were encouraged to report any form of misbehavior committed by another. Letters and phone calls were heavily monitored and censored. The people of the community were also plagued by mosquitoes and tropical diseases. By this time, Jones was quickly declining in health. He had issues with substance abuse, and his mental state was not his best. He set up his own throne in the main pavilion, often comparing himself to Vladimir Lenin and Jesus Christ. He convinced himself and the members of his congregation that the government, the media, and many others were set out to destroy him. He required his members to take part in rehearsals of mass suicide drills in case he deemed this action to be necessary. In November of 1978, Leo Ryan, a U.S. representative from California, began to hear from some concerned relatives of those in Jonestown, stating they were being held against their will. After deciding to hold an investigation on the matter, Ryan traveled to Guyana on November 17th, along with a group of reporters, photographers, and relatives. To their surprise, the group was welcomed into the compound. They were served dinner, provided entertainment, and even got to meet with Jones for an interview. However, several People's Temple members had requested to leave with Ryan and to help the others. The next day, as Ryan and his group were set to leave Jonestown from a nearby airstrip, they were sadly ambushed by gunmen sent by Jim Jones. Ryan was killed, along with a cameraman and a reporter from NBC, a photographer from the San Francisco Examiner, and a female People's Temple member who was attempting to leave with them. That very same day, Jones gathered his members and told them that soldiers would soon be on their way to capture and torture their community. He ordered for everyone to gather in the main pavilion to commit what he called a revolutionary act. The youngest members were the first to pass, as parents and nurses fed them syringes of cyanide, sedatives, and fruit punch. Adults then lined up to drink the concoction themselves as the armed guards continued to surround the pavilion. This horrific event is where we get the phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid. The next day, Guyanese officials showed up to Jonestown to discover hundreds of dead temple members. Jones himself was found in a chair with an assumed to be self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. In total, 909 people were found dead, a third of these victims being children. Some members were able to escape into the jungle, and there were 24 or so who were in another part of Guyana at the time. This leaves only 33 people that survived. A recording of the event was made called the Death Tape. This tape assisted investigators in understanding what really took place that night. Jones referred to this act as a revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world. Here's a snippet from the Jones Death Tape for our listeners.
I very much have tried my best to give you a good life. In spite of all of my tried, a handful of our people, with their lives, have made our life impossible. no way to detach ourselves from what's happened today.
Researchers also found over 1,000 recordings of various types of propaganda, conversations, and sermons that showed the gruesome reality of what was truly happening at the People's Temple. To follow this story, I'll now hand it over to Jess, who will be going in depth on the aspects of communalism within the People's Temple in the Jonestown compound.
Hello, I'm Jess. Thank you, Savannah, for that incredible story that really captured the emotional weight of the People's Temple. Now I'm going to shift our focus into the idea of communalism within the People's Temple, what it looked like, how it shaped the group, and the environment it created. The People's Temple was a movement that attracted thousands, and it was built on the ideals of equality and a collective support. But behind the vision of communal living was something far more controlling and dangerous. Today, I'll be exploring how communalism was implemented in the temple, the reality of life under Jim Jones, and the consequences that followed. Let's get started. So, within the People's Temple, it was founded by Jim Jones in the 1950s, which initially presented itself as a refugee from the racial and economic injustices of the time. Jones preached integration, social justice, and a vision of a better world where wealth was shared and everyone was taken care of. He drew in followers from all walks of life, black and white, young and old, rich and poor, promising them a future built on community and cooperation. One of the key aspects of the People's Temple's communalist philosophy was financial collectivism. Members were often encouraged, sometimes even pressured, to sign over their paychecks, savings, and even property to the church. In return, they were provided food, housing, and health care. At first, this might have seemed like a fair trade, especially for those who had struggled to make ends meet on their own. However, the financial dependence meant that Jones and his inner circle had complete economic control over the members. They also lived communally, sharing homes and responsibilities. They were working within the temple-run businesses, participated in outreach programs, and spent much of their free time in group activities. Everything was about collective responsibility. No one was supposed to think in terms of individual needs or desires. This created an environment where members felt deeply connected to one another, but it also blurred the lines between voluntary participation and enforced obligation. Now I'm going to move on to the reality of life in Jonestown. By the mid-1970s, scrutiny of Jim Jones and the People's Temple was intensifying. There were accusations of abuse, financial misconduct, and authoritarian control that led Jones to move his operation to the remote jungle of Guyana. Jonestown was meant to be the expression of the temple's communal ideals, a self-sustaining socialist utopia free from government interference. On the surface, it seemed to be everything Jones had promised. Members worked together to build houses, grow food, and take care of one another. However, once settled in Jonestown, the reality of communal life quickly turned dark. Jones controlled every aspect of daily existence. The community was cut off from the outside world, and members were forced to endure long hours of labor with little food or medical care. Punishments were harsh for those who questioned authority. Dissenters were publicly humiliated, placed into isolation, or subjected to extreme physical punishments. Members were also forced to participate in white nights, which were rehearsals for mass suicides that Jones claimed would prepare them for the possibility of outside attack. These rituals created an atmosphere of constant fear and paranoia. Another key issue was that communalism, as it was structured in Jonestown, left no room for personal agency. Everything was shared, which meant nothing truly belonged to the individual. Not money, not property, not even their thoughts. Members were encouraged to report anyone who expressed doubts, creating a system where trust was eroded and loyalty was maintained through fear rather than genuine belief. The psychological and social impact includes many things, such as the living in such an isolated communal environment created those profound psychological effects on the members. Many arrived at Jonestown believing they were part of something revolutionary, only to find themselves trapped in a system that drained them mentally, physically, and emotionally. With no outside perspective, many lost the ability to critically evaluate their circumstances. Jones manipulated this environment to his advantage using exhaustion, hunger, and fear to maintain control. He positioned himself as the only source of truth, convincing his followers that their sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. The sense of belonging that once drawn people in was now a tool of coercion. Members were made to feel that leaving meant betraying not just the temple, but their entire purpose in life. The structure of communal living in Jonestown also meant that members had no escape and no way to seek help. The jungle location made it physically difficult to leave, and those who tried were often caught and punished. This was a community that had started as a dream of equality, but had become a nightmare of absolute dependency and control. The aftermath of the People's Temple ended in a tragedy. In November of 1978, it was the ultimate consequence of the extreme communalism that Jones had enforced. When U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown to investigate reports of abuse, several members tried to leave with him. This act of defiance led Jones to order their murder at the airstrip, a pivotal moment that triggered the final white knight. Jones framed the mass suicide as an act of revolutionary defiance, convincing his followers that they were under immediate attack and that death was the only way to preserve their community. Over 900 people, including children, died that day, some willingly, others by force. This event remains one of the darkest examples of how communalism, when controlled by a manipulative leader, can lead to a devastating consequence. So, what have we learned from communalism in the People's Temple? The appeal of a shared supportive community is undeniable. Many people are drawn to the idea of working together for the greater good, creating a society free from inequality and selfishness. But Jonestown is an important reminder of how communalism can be weaponized. When one person holds unchecked power in a collective environment, the principles of equality and shared responsibility can quickly turn into oppression and control. The People's Temple serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of surrendering individual autonomy for the promise of a better world. It highlights the importance of questioning authority, maintaining personal agency, and recognizing when shared purpose turns into blind obedience. I want to give a special thanks to PBS, History Channel, and Catherine B. Abbott as they provided me with helpful information that I was able to incorporate to this part of the communalism and Jim Jones. We appreciate you for tuning in today's podcast. Until next time.